Welcome back to another episode of Podcast on the Brink. Thanksgiving week. Happy Thanksgiving to all of our listeners. Thank you for supporting the show. On this week's episode, Ryan Corazza, Inside the Hall co-founder, is back on the show for the first time this season. Ryan, welcome back to Podcast on the Brink.
Yeah, glad to be here. Got my morning chai going, so let's chat.
So, Ryan, you obviously, just like I have, been watching IU basketball closely for, I'd say, probably 20 years now for you, and about the same for me. Been doing Inside the Hall over 15 years now. This season obviously has started out with a lot of promise. There was a lot of expectations going in, and nothing so far has really happened to change those expectations. Just high level, your thoughts on this team through 4 games, obviously 3 wins against mediocre competition, and then the impressive road win at Xavier. Just from a 30,000 feet level, what are kind of some of your big picture takeaways so far on this team?
Well, they've certainly looked good. I don't think that there's any doubt about that. I think there's, in the last several years, there's kind of been a feeling that, kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop or something like that. And I think this year, it's almost like as they keep performing well, people are starting to, in the fan base, I think, is just kind of starting to trust that this team actually is good as advertised, right? And I think the one thing that's kind of stood out to me is how, outside of the Xavier game, they've really just taken care of business against the 3 other teams they've played. And I think that just goes to show that they're kind of not messing around. I think, in years past, this Indiana team would probably maybe struggle against some of these teams a little bit more, maybe only win by 15 and have, 10 to 20 good minutes of play, and as opposed to 30 or 35 that they're kind of busting out an hour in some of these games, even a real complete 40. So even though these are games that they're expected to win, I think that how they're winning them is a good sign going forward. And really, with the Xavier game, I feel like maybe style points, they're not gonna get an A for how that game ended, and kind of having that 8-point lead in it vanishing quickly in the last 2 minutes there. But it's a tough place to play. Xavier's a real solid team. And again, in years past, that might be a game that Indiana loses, right? And I think the fans are used to seeing them lose. So I think just taking care of business through these four games that have been good. Other than that, I think one thing that's sticking out to me as well is, and I haven't, I guess there has been some talk on this, but just Trayce Jackson-Davis's demeanor to me seems a little bit different this year. I think he'd sometimes have a tendency to fade in and out of games a bit, but also he could get really hyped up after a bucket or an and one or something, and then it just sort of almost not backing it up the rest of the half, or again, kind of being up and down, where I feel like this year he's almost taking on the calm confidence of his coach, Mike Woodson, where he seems a little just more matter of fact, to the point, and has been playing, just extraordinary basketball. So I think he had his demeanor and just sort of his almost quiet, confident leadership has been another development that's been interesting to observe as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up, because that's exactly kind of what I was going to transition to in terms of talking about Trayce Jackson-Davis. To me, so far, he just looks like he's gone to another level as a player. He's obviously been really good for 3 seasons at Indiana, but this year in that Xavier game, I don't know if it's the best game he's played in an IU uniform, but it's up there, and just in terms of how dominant he was. And I'm not saying that Jack Nunge or Freemantle are great defensive players. There's going to be obviously players in the Kansas game, in the North Carolina game, in the Arizona game, in Big Ten season, where he's going to go against so probably more athleticism and better defenders in the front court. But he simply just dominated that game. And for the most part, when he got the ball where he wanted to get it, he scored or he was able to get out of the double team. And I'm just seeing from him so far, maybe a much more mature game, just in terms of, like you mentioned, how he's approaching it and just his demeanor. From just his productivity standpoint, it looks like he's going to go to another level this year. Would you agree with that based on what you've seen so far? And kind of a second point, I guess a follow up to that, after we talk maybe about his game and where it's gone this season so far, what do you think is going to be the counterpunch? This kind of came from a question that we had in the community, but I think it's interesting. What's going to be the counterpunch for Indiana when teams inevitably try to game plan against TJD and make him give the ball up and make him maybe work a little bit harder to get the looks that he's getting at the rim?
Yeah, I think with his game now, I know this summer he kind of did some more guard training, right? And I think a lot of the talk was, okay, well, if he's going to actually play in the NBA, he's going to need a 3-point shot. He's going to at least need something in the mid range, right? We've seen like zero of that. And I think really what that training did for him this summer was have him use his quickness more, right? And I think so often, especially his first 2 years, most of last year until the very end of the season, it was just back to the basket moves, right? And I think now he is facing up from 12 feet out. Sometimes he's even getting the ball at the top of the key and facing up and kind of also being in a position to pass as well. So I honestly think he has more of a face-up game now, and because of that, he's harder to game plan against. I think he could be based on the way the offense was run and how he was used to playing, and frankly, the lack of other guard talent around him, it's kind of just what he sort of had to play and had to be as a back to the basket player. And so, I think with, other, actual guard talent around him and some other players that can do some things, I think that just has opened stuff up for him. And look, if you want to get the ball out of his hands, to the question, it's a double team. But as I think Sean Miller said after the Xavier game, he's better at passing out of that now, right? And you'd hope that again, if he gets doubled, that Indiana knows that's going to happen, and when that happens, Indiana's counter to that counter is to find the open shooter on the other side of the court, which at times he can throw that one-handed kind of skip pass in the corner. They can swing it around. So I think really that's the best way to counter him is to double. But so far, he's done a pretty good job of dealing with that. He also, I'm not sure if this is, something on synergy or any kind of stat you can look up, but to me, I feel like I know his usage rate is about the same as last year, but to me, it seems like the time that he has the ball in his hands seems to be so much less. Like he's getting the ball and he's like, it's just these real quick decisions in a bucket. And he's kind of just like the cherry on top of the offense instead of, just being like the foundation of everything and always having it and kind of like plotting and pounding it. Everything just seems quicker, faster, more to the point, and he's been hyper efficient in doing so.
I think one of the reasons that he's harder to double team and game plan against this year is because he's surrounded by better players. And I want to talk about two of those guys, Malik Reneau and Reneau. I don't know how we're officially saying it. I've heard it both ways. I think I say it kind of both ways.
I think apparently it's supposed to be Reneau.
Okay, just, Reneau. We'll official pronunciation here on Podcast on the Break. Malik Reneau and Jalen Hood-Schifino. They were high school teammates at Montverde. They've come to Indiana and have made major impacts, kind of in different ways so far. Obviously, with Hood-Schifino in the backcourt running alongside Xavier Johnson, kind of running the second unit at times as a point guard, and Malik Reneau, who has really just come in and made it look easy, which is a hard thing to do for a front court player in college basketball. The way he's done it. I mean, he's stronger than a lot of guys so far. But his front court, his game in the post, I feel like is really polished. His footwork, he kind of knows what moves he wants to make when he catches the ball. He doesn't think a whole lot about what he's going to do. He just kind of has it already formulated, and he has moves and he has counter moves, and it's been real impressive to watch. What just on those two guys, how do you think they've, I guess, how big are they right now in terms of Indiana's improvement overall as a team? It's obvious that they're more talented than several of the guys that they replaced in the rotation. I mean, you throw in Hood Schifino for Parker Stewart, and you throw in Malik Renew for Michael Durr, and those are obvious upgrades. But I'm curious how you feel those guys have changed Indiana so far as a team, and their upside. Maybe how does that correlate to Indiana's upside as a team as the season moves along?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a well-trodden take here already, but they don't look like freshmen at all. Super polished, super mature, really have a good sense of the game, even though their games are quite different. And I think your point about who they've replaced in Parker Stewart and Michael Durr has really, I mean, that's just evident. It just raises the talent level in the rotation. I think for all, in terms of Renew, he's shooting 73% from the floor while also having the highest usage rate on the team right now. So he is not shy to just get the ball, and he's just determined down low to get a shot up, right? And it's like he's just slow. He's slow in his moves in terms of not rushing anything and sort of taking his time to get the best look if he's making some moves down low. But I've been really impressed with his passing and his ability to kind of bring the ball up the court as well. I think has been something that I probably wasn't expecting from him coming into the year. And not that he's shown it much or is needed to use it, but he definitely has some good guard skills too. I forget, it was the first or second game where he, I feel like he hit like a step back or something like that. And I was like, whoa, okay. Hood obviously has struggled shooting wise. He did pick it up a little bit last game, but at Xavier, I think he was just 1-9 and then missed his first several shots against Miami. But again, really confident, really, doesn't get too up, too down, really even kill kid, and just gives Indiana another ball handler that you can trust. I think, you say Parker Stewart, but I almost look at him too as instead of Rob Finney, we have Jalen Hood-Schifino now. And I think that's another change too. That's in terms of everything he can do is an upgrade as well. And just his size at 6'6", I think is another thing that defensively, he's a bigger guard for his position. And I think that has been just another upgrade there in terms of having some size on the perimeter. Because the reality is, Indiana has had some small guards. I feel like the last several years, and just you add in some of the guys off the bench, like I know, like a Tamar Bates and a CJ Gunn, and there's some more length. Geronimo, I guess you call him more of a front court player, but there's definitely some more length and size more on the perimeter than I think there's been in a while, which, if you kind of want to compete in today's game, I think that's a good plus to have.
The rotation in terms of Race Thompson and Malik Renew, I feel like that's something we're already going to start hearing conversations about after, Race has not played particularly well in terms of 3-point shooting so far. I think he's 1 of 10 on threes. It was something coming into the season that a lot of people wondered, could he add that to his game? So far, the answer has been no through 4 games, but obviously a lot of season to go. But we saw late in the Xavier game, Mike Woodson going with Renew down the stretch rather than Race Thompson. Do you see just kind of down the stretch of games, is this going to be a situation where Woodson is just going to go with the player who's playing better that particular game? And how do you see just the minutes maybe being distributed between those guys going forward? Is it kind of going to be evenly distributed? Do you see those guys maybe playing together when Trace Jackson Davis, needs a break? And also Jordan Geronimo, maybe where do you think he fits in it? It's almost like Indiana has too much talent on this team. We've talked about the last couple of seasons looking to the bench, and there was a drop off. And obviously, there's going to be games where you're going to have to ride the starters heavily. But it just seems like this year, there's going to be some really talented players and guys who are capable who may not get the minutes that you would expect them to get in a normal season.
Yeah, I think with Race right now reminds me a little bit of what Xavier Johnson was going through earlier in the year with Hood Schifino now out on the court, where the first couple of games he kind of wasn't fitting in and was trying to kind of find his place. And I feel like Race is a bit in a similar a boat. It doesn't feel quite like last year for him, just in terms of, I mean, more or less how he looked out there. I think, he still had some productive numbers here and there. So I do feel like with Woodson, he's going to go with, he's not going to say these are always my closing five. And I can see situations where if, Renew's in foul trouble or Race has had a great game, that I don't think he's going to keep him off the court. But the reality is, I think when you look at that Xavier game, it was kind of a no-brainer, right? And, just because he's a freshman, and I think this is kind of the culture that Mike Woodson has sort of brought. This is how he coaches. It's just sort of when you're in your numbers called, be ready, right? And I think the guarantee of playing time or things like that are just not really how he operates. I think, it's just everyone be ready whenever, and whenever you're in there, play as hard as you can and play within the system. And that's kind of the culture. So I could see a change, Thompson having some run at the end of close games, but if Renew continues to play like he's playing, it's kind of hard to keep the guy off the court, right? So and Race is sort of the casualty there. In terms of Geronimo, obviously there was some talk that the end of last season he may transfer, and he ended up staying. And I think there was also talk of him, playing the three or being more of a wing. And frankly, to me, he just looks like pretty much the same player as last year, or maybe a little bit of an improved version, where just sort of like energy and effort off the bench and bringing a spark. I mean, it's like insane. He had 5 blocks against Miami, Ohio. But in terms of being more of like a wing or like a ball handler, I don't think that he's to a level where that's I don't know, where he can be good enough to be trusted in that role by the coaching staff right now.
Do you think we're to a point with him where, we've talked, I think now 2 off seasons about him taking this leap and him being a more, complete player? Do you think we're to the point with Geronimo where he is what he is as a player, just in terms of how he fits with this program? Because I don't really foresee a scenario where all of a sudden he's going to be a guy that you can trust to make plays on the perimeter with his ball skills. To me, his bread and butter to this point has been his hustle, his athleticism, rebounding, going after loose balls, blocking shots, and that's fine. To have a guy like that on the team, because you obviously need role players to fill that role. But I feel like he's a guy that people had wondered, kind of, is there another level for him to go to? And now that we've kind of seen a small sample size, obviously this season, and it hasn't really materialized, I wonder if maybe this is just who he's going to be as a player at Indiana.
Yeah, I guess you never know, but I do tend to agree that I don't think there's like at least right now from all available evidence, I don't think he's going to have a much expanded game. But I do agree with you that what he brings, especially in the role that he's in now, is important. And I think he's someone, defensively and rebounding wise, that he's a good piece to have off of your bench for what he does.
In terms of Miller Kopp, he's somebody you featured in today's film session at Inside the Hall, and he's obviously been continued to play a healthy amount of minutes. He's a starter. He was in the crunch time lineup against Xavier. Hit a key three. Has really shot the ball well from the perimeter through the first 4 games. I think he's made 9 3-pointers, which is 6 more than anybody on the roster. So it's clear why he's gotten those minutes. Anything different this season in your eyes in terms of Kopp's game? Is he doing anything better? There was some talk early in the season about his off-season routine and things that he did. And to me, the thing I like about Kopp is he just seems to be universally loved by his teammates and seems to be a great locker room culture guy, somebody who I think has value from that standpoint. The thing he did on TikTok the other night in the post game interviews was funny. I thought it's just he seems like a bit of a character. We saw last year the YouTube video where he did the magic trick in the locker room. You could just kind of see his personality as being important in terms of a locker room and being a leader. He's been around the game. And I'm curious, just kind of your thoughts on Kopp, just in terms of his game, and then also maybe what he might mean for this team in terms of leadership and locker room presence.
Yeah, I think weirdly, to me, it doesn't seem like he's shooting 52% from 3-point range. I mean, that's terrific. It's, just 17 attempts right now, but it's actually, 70th best in the country I'm seeing here now. So he's certainly come in and done really well in terms of his shooting so far. And, the reality is he 2 things. I think one, it's clear Mike Woodson, to all those kind of points you said about sort of leadership and as far as how he is as a teammate. And I think that's really valued. And I think too that, he's clearly defending well enough to be in that starting role and to get some pretty good minutes. So I think, that's something to kind of keep in mind here. I think maybe sometimes the perception is he's not, but I think he wouldn't be getting the minutes he's getting without him being able to defend at the level that Woodson wants. And obviously he's a kind of an ultra veteran here now, along with some other guys. And I think there's a lot of value in that. But, it's kind of with the 3-point shooting. I know this just kind of makes me think of it, right? Like, the one piece that continues to sort of stick out as I watch these games is it's still pretty clear that Indiana's not really running specific sets in the half court to get 3-pointers, right? They might be getting them because of a double team, because of, a kick out off of, ball screen. They're certainly getting them in transition. And I think that's been a big piece of the offense in terms of, instead of always just bringing it down the court, dumping it into Trayce Jackson-Davis, I think having more of a transition game now and getting easy buckets has really helped the offense be, it's 12th in the country on Ken Pom as of this morning. So I think that's been helpful, and that's been it allowed them to get some easier threes. And Kopp has been a big part of getting down to the corners or getting to the wing, and his teammates, I think, reminds me kind of it's been since I feel like the Tom Crean years where you really saw forcing it more in transition and getting it to players on the team that can hit the shot. But like in terms of the volume, I know that's still like super low. Like I think I'm reading this here right, that like they're taking 28.3% of their shots from three, which is like 336 in the country. No, it was like super low last year as well. And the weird thing about it though is I feel like, in this day and age, if you're not taking and making a lot of 3-pointers, you're, not keeping up with the other team more or less. And I do think at some point this season, Indiana is probably going to lose a game because another good team that they play, like, in Illinois or what have you, that have a number of shooters, is just going to shoot them out of the game, right? And the counter to that for Indiana, though, and I think Mike Woodson's been pretty clear about this, is that they've been able to be so dominant down low. That's also a super high efficient shot, right? They have between Renew and Trayce Jackson-Davis, they have two guys that are shooting over 70% down low, right? And they're able to get that sometimes at will. And, shots at the basket and 3-point shots are kind of your most efficient shots. So weirdly, even though Indiana is not taking enough 3-point shots in the eyes of some, they are balancing that out by being so efficient down low that it has like still worked out in their benefit so far this year.
Yeah, that a lot of good points there, for sure. And I agree with you that there's going to be a game, maybe multiple games, where Indiana's going to have to make more 3-pointers than they have to this point. But I think at this point, we've seen the body of work now over a season and a couple games in terms of the point distribution on 3-pointers. I just don't necessarily think it's going to be something that Indiana emphasizes heavily. I don't think they're not going to all of a sudden start taking 25 or 30 3-pointers a game like a lot of teams do. It's just not the way the offense is going to be run. Speaking of the offense and the way it's being run, I'm just curious on Xavier Johnson this season. It's been kind of up and down. I thought in the Xavier game, he was great. We talked a lot about Trayce Jackson-Davis and his impact, but they don't win that game without Xavier Johnson. Obviously, you kind of saw him have his moment there where he got the taunting technical, which obviously we're not going to go into a long conversation about that, but it seems like that's a point of emphasis so far in college basketball, but it's also being selectively enforced depending on which game you watch. There's a lot of that going on where it's not called, and some games are being more officiated more closely. But in terms of Xavier so far, I feel like he's been solid defensively. Offensively, I still feel like there's moments where he could just stand to make the easy play rather than trying for something that isn't there. That late turnover against Xavier, I think we're talking a lot differently about that game. If it ends up that Indiana would have lost there, people would have looked at that turnover and kind of said, hey, that was a big moment in the game, and clearly was. So do you see anything with him that concerns you long term in terms of Indiana as a team this season? And what I guess are the points of emphasis for him moving forward to kind of help Indiana reach its ceiling as a team? Because obviously he's as talented as any point guard in the Big Ten, but he's also has these moments where you just scratch your head and say, if he would just slow down or if he would just make a better decision, it could ultimately be the difference between winning and losing.
Well, I just almost very similar to Geronimo. I think Xavier Johnson is who he is, right? And I think he's a player that at his best, certainly he's either one of, if not the best point guard in the conference. I think he plays really hard on defense. I think he's a great defender. I think when they needed it, and this is something they did need against Xavier, against some of these better teams, when Indiana just starts going high ball screen after high ball screen with him and Trayce Jackson-Davis, that was essential, as I did in film session after that Xavier game, really essential in Indiana just figuring something out on offense and being a little bit more steady in that first half to try to keep pace, and then just go into the locker room with a 2-point deficit there. So he brings things that are super important to this team, and clearly, again, there's a lot of trust there in terms of, all right, we got to kind of keep running this, and Johnson's the guy to do it. But, the flip side with Xavier Johnson has always been, because of how hard he plays, because of his demeanor, it sometimes spills over a little bit too much into those making the pass that he shouldn't, or, kind of making those head scratching mistakes. But I just think he's the type of player where you just have to live with that with him. Because if he can kind of have that balance where, the good kind of outweighs the bad, then I think he's a really important piece. And, we'll see as it goes along. Obviously there are a number of games you could point to. The Wisconsin game comes to mind. I think that was the one in Madison where he kind of, missed a ton of shots at the end of the game. There are a couple of games where like, he shot Indiana out of the game, or he had some mistakes at the end. But there were also so many games last year too where he was the reason they won, or he had some, his stats at the end of the season were terrific. And frankly, other than Parker Stewart last year, he had the best 3-point percentage on the team, and he started out 3 of 3. He hasn't taken much, only 3 shots in 4 games, but they've all gone in. So, I think you just kind of got to live with some of the mistakes, because that's who he is. But he's good enough otherwise, where if he doesn't spill too far into that kind of over emotional mistake zone, that he's real important.
Obviously, won't talk to you again on the show before next week's big game on Wednesday night against North Carolina. I'm planning to have a preview episode, probably 2 podcasts next week, ahead of North Carolina, and then I'll also probably ahead of the Rutgers road game that opens up Big Ten play. But just Indiana obviously has a chance to go into next week's matchup against North Carolina, perhaps ranked in the top 10. North Carolina right now is number 1. We'll see if they're still unbeaten and number 1 when they come to Bloomington next week. But what do you think we can potentially learn out of that game next week? North Carolina's not been great this season. It's almost a game that you go in weirdly thinking Indiana should win. They're at home and they've played better than UNC going in. But it feels like we're kind of back to some of those green seasons where there was a team that had a lot of promise, top 10, top 15, having a marquee game in Bloomington. It seems like a prime spot for a big Indiana performance and a national statement, at least on the national stage, as big a one as you can make potentially for the month of November.
For sure. And it's interesting. I know in the AP poll, North Carolina is number 1, but in KenPom right now, they're 17. I think they started out the year like 9th or something like that. So they've fallen a bit just because, I think just kind of on expectations, not to say that they're, they're still undefeated, but I just think some of their wins have not been where Indiana may have a little bit maybe overperformed in terms of the blowout nature of some of theirs. I think North Carolina has been a little bit different in that regard, the other way. And right now, KenPom has it as a 68% chance of victory for Indiana, and has them with a 5-point victory. So I do tend to agree that it does feel like, look, anything can happen. And obviously there's a lot of talent on that North Carolina team, but it does feel like, again, the expectation, I'm sure, when the line comes out, Indiana will probably be favored as well. So it does kind of harken back to years past when if a good team was coming in, the odds makers, the advanced statistic people, and I think maybe even the fan base all sees the Hoosiers as the favorite, which is a little bit of a new feeling of late.
Ryan, thanks for waking up extra early for us to make time for us this week on Podcast on the Brink. It was good to talk to you about this team's 4-0 start.
Hey, anytime.
Podcast on the Brink listeners, thanks as always for your support of the show. As I say every week, it's a small thing that you can do to really help us out. Leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcast. simply, if you're in Spotify and you listen to us there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us continue to grow the show and help more people find out about the work we're doing. So we would really appreciate you taking the time to do that for us. And as I said, we'll be back next week, probably with 2 shows, one earlier in the week, previewing Indiana, North Carolina. And later in the week, I believe we're also going to have an episode previewing Indiana's road trip to Rutgers to open Big Ten play. It'll be here before you know it. Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone. Thank you, as always, for listening, and we will be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.